joining me today for a walk in the garden. I'm Liz Davey, and this show is on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television. This is a series of garden and cooking shows that we have been doing for the last few years, every couple weeks in my garden, so that you can see how it grows throughout the year. I'm in the herb garden. I have a little terraced herb garden. Unfortunately, it's starting to get a little too much shade from this cherry tree, which was supposed to be a dwarf cherry, and somehow it turned out not to be too dwarf. I keep cutting limbs off to get more sun, but we do get good morning sun, and we are here in the morning today instead of our usual afternoon time, so we are getting some sun. Right now, all the herbs have been planted, including the tender herbs, which would be, well, rosemary is semi-tender, but I have borage and lemon verbena. In other parts of the garden, I have pineapple sage and lemongrass, which are very tropical. I think they're zone 10 plants. They don't particularly like these evenings that are going down to 40 degrees, but they do like hot and steamy weather, which we probably will be getting in the next few days or weeks. I've also put in some basil plants, a few parsley plants, and scented geraniums, a peppermint geranium and then a nutmeg geranium. They're all different scented geraniums: orange, nutmeg, rose is one of the most popular ones, if you can find it. A lot of times they're sold as one with a kind of pungent scent, which is called a mosquito repellent. I'm not sure how well it works, but its scent is not nearly as nice as the rose one, or the peppermint, so I would prefer one of those. The scented geraniums leaves are edible. They can be used in food products or at least as garnishes, so you don't have to worry about them being poisoned. They're not the same as your regular garden variety red, white, pink geranium that they sell as bedding plants. These are a different type of geranium. There are many different types of things called geranium. If you look at the botanical names, you'll find that they are quite different sometimes. Our chives are in blossom, and pretty soon we'll be deciding what to do with them, whether to deadhead them or let them go to seed. I have a pretty good group of chives here. I'll probably let a few go to seed, but I will remove some of the other blossoms once they turn brown, just for the looks of the garden. I grow a few herbs that I don't use in the kitchen. One of them is comfrey, and another one is valerian. The valerian has a very sweet scent. Both of these were once used as medicinal products. Some people may still use them, although they have both gone out of favor in some ways. The valerian, it's the root that's used, and I believe comfrey, it's the root as well. They aren't as popular now. Sometimes they have substances that have proven to be carcinogenic, so people are not using them quite as frequently for medicinal purposes, but they are nice to have in the herb garden as a reminder of things that people used to grow when there was no other alternative. And again, it's a heavenly scent, and I do like them for that purpose, and they can be picked and brought inside as a wonderful scented flower. I grow an agastache, which is anise hyssop, and it has a real anise flavor, and again, the leaves of that can be used in cooking, as well as many of the mints. Right now, we're going through a little stretch of dry weather, so if you have mint, you're going to need to water it a little bit, or it will just die back or not produce very many mint leaves for you. The roses that I have in this garden are old roses, and that means generally that roses bloom once. This one is just about to come into bloom. It's called an apothecary rose, and the petals were used in perfumery and apothecary products. Again, it's another plant I don't necessarily consume, although the rose petals can be candied and used as a garnish or made into a jam that can be consumed. The sorrel is going to seed, and we're going to just snip off any of those shoots that are coming. We're getting into the season where everything's been planted, pretty much, but we need to deadhead a few things, which means taking off old bloom stalks so that they don't go to seed. This helps a plant provide new leaves instead of going to seed. The purpose of a plant is to grow leaves, then to flower, and go to seed to propagate itself. We want to continue the process of growing leaves, so we will fool the plants a little bit by taking off their blossoms. They won't go to seed, and they'll continue to produce some leaves or strengthen the roots. One thing about these old roses is that they form suckers, and a sucker is a bloom coming up or a plant coming up some distance from the plant. And I do need to cut these out. There's also one back up here in the chives, couple, and we'll just keep cutting those out. Otherwise, the rose will just spread uncontrollably. Modern roses don't do this. They stay put pretty well. But some of these older ones do tend to sucker. I grow another rose, which is called Rosa Monday, and it will be blooming in another couple weeks. It has striped blooms, white and red. It too is an old rose, so it's only a once blooming rose. After they bloom once, then you can do the pruning, instead of pruning them in the early spring, as you do one that blooms all the time. All the herbs now can be harvested. We have thyme that's actually the caraway thyme, which is a wonderful herb with pork, is now blooming. Most of the thymes do have some blooms on them. They range from pink to purple to white. The oregano can be picked and dried at this time, and also the chives can be picked and frozen. I don't do anything with the blossoms. You can make vinegar from the blossoms, scented or chive flavored vinegar. It's also chive scented and a bright pink color. All you do is basically soak them in vinegar for about a week and you will have a chive flavored vinegar. We have lemon balm, lime balm, parsley, a variety of mints. I have apple mint, peppermint, chocolate mint, orange mint, and mint julep mint. So you can guess what we might do with that. The borage that I planted looks a little dry. I need to get in here with water. Again, anything that you've put in more recently will need to be watered in order to keep it going. Now's the time to just enjoy the herb garden, perhaps do a little mulching, definitely do some watering if things are dry. Herbs are known to like poor dry soil, but they do much better if they have sufficient water and sufficient nutrients. So it's something to keep in mind. Where this is terraced, the areas that are up a little higher do get pretty dry, so I have to make sure that I keep it well watered when it is dry. Now let's move over to the perennial garden. I think we have some deadheading to do over there too. June is probably, early June particularly, one of the best times in the perennial gardens. So many things are in bloom then. It's a chore to keep the garden going through July and August. But June is a wonderful time to have flowers, lots of fresh flowers, and a lot of color in the garden. The lilies are starting to bloom. If you plant it right, you can have lilies for quite a long time. There are many different varieties of lilies that you can have. These are some orange, pinkish orange lilies. I guess you'd say they're kind of apricot color, although the color varies with light. And you'll find this throughout the garden. Depending on when you come out, colors will look a little different. Columbine is blooming and almost done. We have some that's going to go to seed. And we can decide if we want them to go to seed and have more columbine throughout the garden, or if you want to deadhead these stalks and put them in the compost. I have a delphinium back here which is budded. That will be out in about a week or two. I have a few old roses in back. Again, they're the antique roses that only bloom once. Newer roses, and I have some of those as well, will continue to bloom all summer, especially if deadheaded. The bulb foliage is still turning brown. It would be nice to get rid of it right away, but you can't do that. And sometimes you can lift it up and you get what's underneath out. But I will continue to remove the browning bulb foliage as it turns brown. You need to let it completely ripen or the bulbs will not bloom next year. It's kind of a pain, but those spring bulbs are awfully nice in April and May. I try to put a little color in the garden with different colored foliage plants. It kind of adds some variety. We have daylilies, which will be blooming in another month, so again, extending the bloom. This is another type of geranium. This is a perennial geranium. They come in pink. I think this is Wargrave pink. I also have one behind it, which is a little sprawling. I believe that one is Brookside, and it has a blue bloom. This one kind of sprawls all over the place, but it does have pretty blue blooms, and we have more of that down a little further. This is nectar garlic, and as the day progresses, the little bells will open up. It will be gone in a short time, and I'll leave it again to brown off the foliage and the bloom stalks. We'll see how the bloom stalks look before I take them out. This is we'll have pink bells. It's a campanula, and it's Campanula Elizabeth. My name is Elizabeth, so I kind of like plants that named after me. So it wasn't really named after me, but nonetheless, I like it. Like to think it might be. The plant behind it is called Phlomis, and it's starting to come into bloom. You'll notice it has layered blooms, and again, they add variety to the garden. It's a strange little plant, and it's kind of half hardy in this area. I tend to put a little mulch on it in the fall to make sure it keeps going. It's yellow. It will last quite a long time, so we'll probably see it again in a couple weeks. The plant behind it is a Baptisia, and this is the species Baptisia. It is native, and it is a very good butterfly plant. It's very perennial. Once you have it, it's kind of difficult to move. It'll keep coming back up, and so you want to find a spot where you can leave it. Behind it I have some pink iris, the last of the iris. The iris, the German iris, and the Siberian iris are pretty much gone. And I'm going to move over here, and this one is a verbasicum, Southern Charm. It has kind of peach and purple blossoms, and again, this will need to be deadheaded, and perhaps we'll get some bloom from it a little later, perhaps not. These are the German iris, or what people recognize as iris. This one is Beverly Sills, is the variety. And I haven't had this one bloom for a few years, and I started taking a little better care of it. But once they're gone, and once each stem has had all the blooms bloom, I will cut that back for neatness and also to help the plant preserve its energy. These are the Siberian iris that were in bloom even a week ago. They bloomed for several weeks, but now they're gone. So I want to get in there and remove all the old bloom stalks. Live flowers are nice, dead flowers not so much. Poppies are now in bloom, and these are starting actually to go, although we still have some buds. This one is, I believe, Helen Elizabeth is the variety. And this one is a pink one. A common one is an orange color. I'm not real fond of orange in the garden, as you've probably surmised. So I prefer the pinks and purples and blues. Other people like a lot of orange and red and yellow. It's all a matter of personal taste, and when you're the gardener, you get to choose. These I will, when they're finished, save the heads. They're rather decorative, and I also like them dried and perhaps spray painted gold to be used in some of the Christmas decorations. They look very nice in a decoration of greens if they're sprayed white or pink. They will turn brown. This particular variety of poppies does not spread its seed as freely as the bread seed poppies do, which is a different type. The alliums, the large alliums, which were purple a few weeks ago, are now also ripening, and I'll let those turn brown because, again, I like to pick those and use them as dried flowers. The rose behind me is a rugosa rose, and it blooms throughout the year. It's, I can't remember the variety. It may be Hansa, but it has smaller clusters of bloom. With rugosa roses, it's important not to use spray on them. So if you have insect problems, you're going to have to kind of hand pick any insects that are on them. They're pretty hardy. They don't usually have any problems, and anything that, like aphids, you could just use a spray of water and get rid of those. But the foliage is very easily damaged by pesticides, so you don't want to use any of that on a rugosa rose. Other roses, it's fine, but don't spray the rugosas. Moving on down the line, we have more lilies in bud. Here's another one of these Brookside geraniums. I also have a Johnson's Blue in some of the other areas. And these are daisies that are early, an early type of kind of field daisy. And again, those will be deadheaded when they're finished. In bud is butterfly weed, and butterfly weed will attract the monarch butterflies. It's one of the few things, it's related to milkweed. It is an Asclepias, and it attracts monarch butterflies, and they can consume the foliage, lay their eggs on it. The caterpillars will consume the foliage, and you're helping the monarch butterfly by planting it. It too is a native plant. This variety, it's best to stay with native varieties for some of the butterflies because it's what they need in order to lay eggs and feed their caterpillars. Just having plants with pollen isn't enough. You need some host plants for butterflies as well. And I'm trying to add a few more of those as I add garden things, as I add plants. It's nice to have the pollen plants, but having the nectar plants but having pollen or host plants is equally important. Another rose, I have a rose climbing up the hedge with nepeta behind it. I have another iris back there, which is going to take a little time to deadhead. A little more allium. The alliums are nice in that they're very deer resistant because they're in the onion family. You don't have to worry about the deer eating them. They don't like them. And they come in various varieties that bloom in different heights, different colors, usually in the white, pink, purple family. And you can get them to bloom throughout the season. We have a nice set of bumblebees back on the nepeta. They love it. It's a very good bee plant. This is a Tradescantia, Concord grape, and it too will be cut down once it's finished blooming because it gets really kind of rough looking. You have to pick which ones to cut and which not. I have rhubarb, and none of my rhubarb has gone to seed. Sometimes rhubarb will throw up a stalk with a seed on it, and I cut those off if it happens to do it. Again, it helps the root of the rhubarb to maintain its strength so you get the nice red stems that you want for cooking. Right now it's peony season, and you're seeing peonies all over in various gardens. Again, they come in various colors. We had the tree peony back here, and its blooms are gone, and it's starting to form seed. It's almost impossible to grow one from seed, so what I'll do is, again, deadhead that and take off these blooms so that it won't go to seed, and we'll throw some strength back to the plant. The peonies, again, I have a white one in back. I have a bright pink one here and a pale pink one up a little further as we move up. Some of the bulb foliage takes a while to go to brown and be ready to pull. These were English bluebells, and they're still in the process of gathering strength for next year's blossom, so we'll leave those alone, but it's going to leave a hole. Therefore, I have some plants in pots that I can move in to fill those holes once these plants have gone to dormancy. One more Siberian iris here. The rest have been deadheaded, or we will deadhead right now. More lilies that bloom a little later. This is a plant, an annual heliotrope, which is classified as an herb, and it too smells very good. It's a very nice scent. It's kind of like baby powder if you happen to pick a blossom. This is the Johnson's blue geranium, which looks pretty nice with the daisies that are coming up there. Again, those will be gone in another week or so. This oriental poppy is on its way out. It was Patty's plum. Now this one is known to sometimes rebloom, so I'll probably remove the flower stalks on this one eventually. As we move up this way, I have Monarda and daylilies. The yellow blooms here are lady's mantle, and I have several of those. Again, that is classified as an herb, but it's also very decorative. It was once used in preparations for women, and now it's just grown as an annual pretty much. This is a pale pink poppy, and right in here, this is another allium. And this variety, I don't know, hopefully you can see it, is called Graceful, and it's a short one. Now, unfortunately, I planted it a little far back, but I can see it when I'm weeding my garden, so all is not lost. More alliums here. These also were purple. They bloomed a little later than the others. And finally, I have clematis coming up. I had almost given up on them. I ordered them mail order, 2 of them. One in this area and one on the other side of the garden. And I had just about given up, but then they started coming up. You do plant them deep, so I guess it took them a while to make it. Last year I had morning glories on this area, and now I'm picking up sprouts of morning glories which went to seed. I could let morning glories climb up, but I think it would probably steal some of the light and nutrients from the growing clematis that's trying to climb up. Hopefully next year we'll be able to see some blooms on that tower instead of just a tiny little sprout under it. This is another perennial geranium, and this is a very common one. It's almost wild in some spots, and it has the bright pink flowers. Again, I'll probably give that a rather severe haircut, and it will come back and bloom again a little bit more. This is an old rose that was given to me by a friend. It was her mother's rose. When she moved to an apartment, she shared it with me. She didn't want to lose it, but she had no place to put it. It too is a once blooming rose. You'll notice it hasn't been pruned yet. I'll prune this one back after it finishes its bloom. We didn't prune it early in the spring because otherwise we would have taken off all of these lovely blooms. This is another Monarda, or bee balm. Bee balm and Monarda are the common name. The common name is bee balm. This is Bradburia, which is a light pink one. It's a little different. It's not as prone to mildew as some of the others. And I put that in last year, and it's doing real well this year. And another hardy geranium. This is a different type, Immaculatum. And again, this one today is covered with honeybees, and bumblebees. So it's a good one if you are trying to save some bees, which we all need to try to do. With so much spraying, which brings me to the thought of pesticides. If you're going to use them, please be wise and try to avoid the I can never say it, but there's a class of them, neonicotinoids is the name of them, and they are very harmful to bees. And other pesticides, even though they're labeled as safe, it's best to use them either very early or late in the day when the bees are not around. Generally, late in the day, the bees kind of go back to their beehives and homes, and so late in the day is a good time to use them. You really want to be careful because we need the bees. Bees are what pollinate most of our food, and we need to encourage them instead of trying to kill them. Now let's move on to the vegetable garden. The garden is now planted. I still have a few plants left to find a space for, but for the most part everything has been planted and most of all of it has come up. That includes some flowers that were planted later because of the weather and various sets, broccoli, cabbages, Brussels sprouts. I don't do cauliflower, lack of space. I have done it in the past, but this year I decided to do the mini cabbages instead. We have a ton of lettuce, plenty of salad material in this garden. I have different colors of lettuce from very dark red to kind of a speckled red and green, bright green, red. We have spinach, and the spinach is ready to harvest anytime, individual leaves or whole clumps. A few radishes along the way, and they're ready to be pulled and need to be pulled and used fairly soon, and then we can replant a few more. Beets, Swiss chard. The Swiss chard needs to be thinned out. Any thinnings can be used in salad. I have borage that's come up as a volunteer plant from last year's borage that I planted. It went to seed and I've left a few plants along the way. They'll have nice blue flowers, and again, those flowers can be used in salads. The leaves taste like cucumber. They can be chopped in salad too. Arugula is actually getting to the point where it's going to need to be removed. It's starting to go to seed, so I'll need to use that quickly. And the kale too can be used now as a baby kale, and then we'll add it to salads, and I'll let some of those grow as a more mature plant, which can continue to be used. The garlic is starting to put on its seed stalk, and once these get up a little taller, I'm going to cut them off. These are garlic scapes, and they can be used as garlic, which is good because the garlic I planted last year has just about run out, so I can start using chopped scapes instead of garlic. I have strawberries over here, and this year I had to take the blossoms off. I planted them this spring. The first year, in order to establish a strawberry patch, you remove all the blossoms, and that is to give it a chance to form runners, and each plant will produce 2 or 3 other plants across the season. So right now we keep it watered, we keep a little fertilizer on it, but take off all the blossoms. And it's hard to do when you know those blossoms will make nice strawberries. But if you don't do it, your patch will run out within a year or so, and you won't have any more strawberries to pick. A patch can last up to 5 years if you take good care of it and let some of the runners form each year and renew the plants. The peas are starting to form peas, and these on the end, I have 3 different kinds. These are shell peas, and we have some peas in there, and we'll wait until the pods are nice and full before we start picking. And as you can see, this is a shorter variety. These are a little taller. These are the snap peas, and they're in blossom, but I don't see any pods yet. They haven't formed pods. And then down at the very end, the tallest ones are snow peas, which are used when they're very immature and flat. You're probably familiar with them in Chinese cookery and in stir fries. Behind these are the scallions, and I've planted some flowers and tomatoes. That area has not been mulched yet. The rest of the garden I've mulched with straw. This helps keep some of the moisture in, and it also keeps the weeds down to a great extent. Not entirely, you still have to weed the garden, but it does help a great deal, and I think it makes the garden look really neat as well. I'm still planting a few strawberry or a few tomatoes and peppers. They like warm weather, so I really waited to plant some of these things, and also the bean seeds until a little later. I've planted yellow beans, green beans, and a few lima beans, and you can see the lima beans are the slowest to germinate. I planted these all the same day, but different varieties come up. They have their own little schedule of when they want to come up based on temperature and that sort of thing, and the conditions. I have this planted to herbs and lettuce, more lettuce, later lettuce. I have lemon basil, lime basil, just regular basil for pesto, and also some lettuce in between, parsley and cilantro. A variety of herbs I plant down here because I generally need more. Oh, dill also. I need more of these plants than I would get just with one little plant in the herb garden. The peppers are still pretty tiny. I need to be sure I water all of these plants that I've set in if it's a dry season. The parsley's doing really well this year. Some years parsley has a hard time germinating, but I have a nice little row of green coming up here. It's still pretty tiny, but it's looking good, so I think we'll have parsley. The eggplant, again, would like a little warmer weather than we've been having. We have some days that are warm, but we've had some real cool nights, so hopefully it'll be warmer at night and it will do a little better. I did 2 teepees this year. I've usually done one with cucumbers so that they can climb up. This year I also did some Indian beans. My husband was given these beans when he went on a trip and learned about Native Americans, and one of the Native Americans gave him these Indian beans, which are very, very old. At least the, not the seeds themselves, but the variety has been passed on and on. And this was in the hope that he would share some of the seed from this crop later on. So basically these will be grown and they're used as dried beans. And right now I'm giving them something to climb on because they're doing pretty well here and they need to have something to climb up. They won't just climb the poles by themselves. So I'm using my green garden twine and running it around the pole a couple times. And then I'll start going up and down with it. I'll do the same with the cucumber pole to give these a little something to climb. You want to keep it fairly loose. And then I'll use one of the garden stakes to fasten it down a little bit. Got that one a little tight. I'll just continue doing this all the way around each of the teepees. And this will give the beans a little support. They will cling to it as they go. And in a couple weeks, you'll see these teepees covered with foliage, then blossoms, and then beans. Or cucumbers, depending on which one. We'll spread these out a little bit and keep it loose. So that's how you build a bean teepee or a cucumber. If you're going to do squash on something like this, you probably need a sturdier framework. Squash can get very heavy, especially when the fruits start to hang down. So you probably need some sort of fencing or at least some very sturdy poles if you want to put your squash into the air. I've planted summer squash down in this area. I have a few of the yellow squash. The zucchini is all germinating and doing really well. I'm going to watch that for insects and spray it with either spinosad or another safer spray, and again do that in the evening so that bees are not there, and try to avoid spraying at all when they start to blossom. A couple of my summer squash didn't germinate, so it's not too late if you have something that didn't germinate to go out and replant it. You've got until about the end of June and you can still get some squash from it, maybe a little later, but that usually is okay because you're busy eating the early ones. Again, I've got a cherry tomato here that I grew, and I saw one that I wanted to try, so I'm just going to plant it in the same area. And I use a double system. It's kind of like wearing a belt and suspenders, but I use stakes and a cage around my tomatoes. And I'm going to plant this other one. You can see it's pretty well root bound. And I'm going to just break those roots apart so that they can spread out. And plant it right in the hole, and then we'll water this in well. And we'll expect that to climb right up. I have a new lovage plant here that's from the one behind it. I'm going to save that, probably dig it up and share it with someone next spring. I'll try to remember where it is. I have a variety of things coming up that I didn't plant. One of the plants is cilantro, and I plant it, but what I planted now hasn't even come up hardly. But these came up. They were seeded from last year's plants. I let some go to seed, and so they come up throughout the garden, and now we can start using this. And in fact, we will use that when we go inside. That's one of the things we're going to add to our salad today. I also have lots of dill on the other end of the garden, and I've been able to use that and pick some for drying as well. This is an herb called Sweet Annie. It looks a lot like cilantro, but it isn't, and you can tell the difference. It has a very lacy leaf. It is a very aromatic plant. It's often used as a room deodorant. Just a bouquet of it can kind of scent the whole room and be the Febreze of the natural world, I guess. So Amish room freshener is sometimes called. It's called Sweet Annie. And I let a few plants grow. They reseed, and I let a few plants grow each year. I haven't planted it for years. Now let's go back to the shade garden. Down in the shade garden we have a problem, or a potential problem. You'll notice all these holes, and I didn't dig them. This is where all the crocuses were this spring, and now it's where all the chipmunks are. They're gathering here to have a little party and dig up the bulbs. I used to worry a lot about it, and I was really trying to keep the chipmunks away, and then I realized they take them someplace else and plant them for me. So I have learned to make peace with them. I will come through with some compost, fill their holes. Once these crocuses, they're on their way out, the foliage is drying, and once it is all dried, I will remove the foliage and fill all the chipmunk holes, wipe off my patio blocks, and go on with the summer. Sometimes you have to pick your battles, and chipmunks are kind of cute. They keep the dog entertained, and I just am not up to a fight with chipmunks. You'd almost have to put down wire to keep them out. Now if you have something really fancy and they're getting at that, that's another story. Or if the voles are undermining my hostas, then I'm willing to go to some effort to try to keep them out. But chipmunks, it's very difficult to control them once they start digging up bulbs. So I plant new crocuses, and I wait and see where they've planted some of my other crocuses. I have quite a few in this area, so I really don't miss the ones that they tend to dig up and redistribute. It's time to, if you don't want more hellebores, it's time to remove the blossoms. You'll see there's a seed pod forming on these. They go to seed really easily, unless they're a hybrid. excuse me. So this little pod has seeds. And I suppose I could plant these and have a crop in another 3 or 4 years. But some of these I will take off because I'm getting way too many of them. They've reseeded and reseeded. And I have about enough, and I have little ones coming up under them. And they also look a little bad, so I will remove at least some of the blossoms. And I will not put these in my compost because one of the things about hellebores is they are toxic. And I don't want them in my compost that I would put in the vegetable garden. So I will put these in a trash bag to remove them. And again, just snapping off the blossoming shoots. The leaves come up after the flowers, so we'll leave the nice new leaves. We've taken off the leaves from last year in the early spring. I have a lot of different hostas in here, and again, I have to be vigilant with the deer spray. Deer will not eat hellebores, so that's good. They don't eat ferns very much either, or they don't, unless they're extremely hungry. Then they'll eat just about anything. But my hostas, they would eat, and so I do keep up with my deer spraying program. Also, slugs tend to like hosta, and they'll leave big holes in the leaves, unless I use some of the sluggo, which is an iron compound that is a safe compound to use, and it does get rid of the slugs. I started early with it, so right now I'm not having too much problem. If the weather gets really wet, then I'll need to be vigilant again and make sure that the leaves aren't getting eaten. Now, the pond. I've been adding plants to the pond. I can't really do too much in the way of water lilies because I'm in too much shade, and they bloom maybe with one flower and that's it. And water lilies need sun. This is a shady area pond, so many of the plants that would grow in and on top of the water just don't make it. So I grow them around the edge. And this is a new one that I haven't even put in yet. It's papyrus. And I couldn't resist it because it has such an interesting look to it. And it's such a contrast with the other things that are in the pond, including the elephant ears that are hopefully going to be up soon, and one that's been added. But I can't just stuff it in the pond right now. I'll have to put it in a bigger pot. And I will be doing that and using some garden soil. You don't want to use too rich a soil with pond plants. You can add the fertilizer tablets, but soil itself needs to be kind of sandy and just kind of regular garden soil. So I'll be adding some of that to a little larger pot, and then I'll add that to the other plants that are in the pond. I put in a new elephant ear, which is just starting to break the surface. 2 older ones, which are trying very hard to keep in bloom. And then I planted a canna lily as well to see if it would come up. I also put the curly grass in, and that seems to be liking the pond very much in the pot. And I'll probably use a pot about that size for this papyrus and add that. I have several fish, 3 to be exact, left. I think 3 or 4. They're tiny, and they hide every time I come out. I guess they think I'm going to catch them. But they haven't figured out yet that the food comes from the people. And so I do add a little bit of food. They're little fish, so a little food goes a long ways. And they do seem to be growing. Other things that I can add that are safe for those fish would be the pond clarifier. And this is a powder that I can put in the pond to clarify the water. It helps to any sediment to form into little bunches that again can be removed by the filter system. And then I use one of these about every week, and this is called Nature's Defense, and it is a whoops, nope, no, there goes the lid. A blend of enzymes and bacteria that help keep the pool in good shape and working well. And we just throw one of those in, it'll float for a while and then sink down. And about once a week I add one of those, week to 10 days. Again, with these fish that are so small, the pond is staying quite clean. It's just not getting very dirty as we go. again with the clarifier, I haven't needed too much of it. Once the fish are larger and producing more waste, then you need to add a few more things to it, including sediment, a product that helps break down sediment that forms in the pond. But I've been able to keep it pretty clean so far this year. And we can see the fish if they come out. I did put in a tile, a flue tile, a piece of flue tile. I went over to the supply store. They have cement blocks and all those things. And I asked for a flue tile, and they only came in 2-foot lengths or 4-foot lengths. And I said, well, I need 1 foot. So they did saw in half a 2-foot length so that I could put that in the bottom of the pond. And this gives the fish a place to hide. 2 years ago, I lost all my fish to a blue heron who decided to have a nice lunch. And he ate some fish that were 8 and 10 inches long. Now I'm restocking, but on advice of some other people with ponds, they needed a place to hide. Again, without any cover of water lilies and other plants, the fish were kind of out in the open, and the heron had just very easy pickings. So I added a flue tile, and they seem to be staying in that tile. They hide from me at this point, so I'm sure they would hide from any other predator as well. The bird can't get them in there, and hopefully all will be well, and they will continue to grow and have a place to go in case of attack. I will also be adding an aerator to the pond. As the weather gets warmer, you need more oxygen in the water, and the aerator will just add air into the water and more oxygen, and it'll form little bubbles. So I'll have 2 aerator balls, one over by the plants and probably one over on this side, and we'll be able to add a little more oxygen to it. This helps keep it neat. Having running water in the pond is important here because I do get mosquitoes. It's in the shade, and mosquitoes find that very appealing. But mosquitoes will not lay eggs in water that's moving, and that's why I want to keep my waterfall going. It keeps the whole pond just circulating and moving, and therefore it cuts down on the mosquito population. It's also good to try to avoid any standing water around. Mosquitoes will lay eggs in any still standing water, so don't leave water in plant saucers or any other spots in the yard, or if you do, like a bird bath, change it very frequently so that you don't have mosquitoes laying eggs in that and making more mosquitoes. We have quite enough as it is. They are part of nature, and they do feed the birds. I don't have as much problem probably because I have lots and lots of birds. Again, the Japanese beetles and the gypsy moths are not too bad for me, and I think a lot of it is because we do have so very many birds in the area. I don't use the pesticides, and they find this a safe haven. Lots of the plants are doing well. Again, I'll need to water if it doesn't rain and rain sufficiently. I've added a few more shade plants. This is a turtle head I put in last year, and it's really gone to big heights. It's only supposed to be about 2 feet tall. This one didn't get the message, I guess, because it's really getting up there. It'll be interesting to see it when it's in bloom. I may have to use a support rod in it to hold it up. The hostas are not blooming yet. They're just having their leaves give some nice texture. Again, with a shade garden, texture is where it's at. You don't get a lot of bloom, but you do get plants that have texture. I do have rhododendrons. Now's the time to prune them and other pruning of spring things that have bloomed. Rhododendrons, azaleas, if they've already bloomed, now is the time to prune them. You don't prune them before because then you lose the blooms. You prune them right after bloom, and then they'll have time to form buds for next year's bloom. Not everything gets pruned in the fall or winter. Some things are pruned. Spring bloomers are generally pruned after they bloom. Now, it's time to just sit down and relax and enjoy the garden a little bit. A lot of the heavy work is done. The plants are in, they're growing. We've been able to mulch things to help with the weeding. Now is the time to sit down and enjoy your garden, because that's why you planted it in the first place. Now let's go inside and see what we can do with some of the things that are growing in the herb garden and vegetable garden. Today I'm going to use some of the things from the garden and make a chicken salad, and this is a southwestern chopped chicken salad. And I'm going to start by making the dressing right in the bowl. And I'm going to give you the ingredients for a whole recipe. However, I am making a half recipe simply because it's going to feed 2 people and not 6. It will be generous servings for 2. But as I said, the recipe makes 6. So that would be a half a cup of plain yogurt. And I used Greek yogurt. And 3 tablespoons of olive oil. And I want 2 teaspoons of honey. Get it out of the teaspoon a little bit. And 2 teaspoons of cider vinegar. One teaspoon of minced garlic. The juice of 1 lime. And half a jalapeno pepper. Some garlic stuck here. Chopped very fine, and I used canned. If you have fresh, you can use that. And then we want 2 teaspoons of taco seasoning and a mild seasoning, and you can make your own. There are plenty of recipes online if you want to make your own, if you have lots of herbs and spices, or you can buy the little mix that's available in the grocery store. And I'm going to stir this around. This will be our dressing for the salad. And you can make this in a separate container, but why do more dishes than you need to? We can mix it in this very container. And then we'll add our salad ingredients. And I want to add, I'm going to start with chicken, and we'll add 6 cups of cubed chicken. And this can be chicken that if you had chicken the night before or even the day before, cook extra, and then you'll have enough to add to the salad. And we want 6 cups of chopped greens, and they called for romaine. I used a variety of greens, a little kale, a little arugula, and a little lettuce, and just finely chop that up. 1½ cups of corn, and the corn I used was canned shoe peg corn. 2 chopped tomatoes. Again, it is a chopped salad. Oops, we missed a piece. 1½ cups of black beans. Again, these are canned and drained well, as was the corn. Half a red onion, finely chopped. 3/4 cup of shredded cheddar cheese. And a handful of chopped cilantro. That can be as much as you want or as little. If you really don't like it, you don't have to add it at all. And then we want to add half an avocado. And I've waited till last for that because they do turn brown if you add them too quickly. And we're going to, actually, you want to add a whole one. The other half, leave the pit in when you put it in the refrigerator, perhaps a little lemon juice on it. But what I'm going to do is just chop this one right in the shell, going both ways. These are very ripe. I ran into an avocado sale, and for once they were quite ripe. And then I can just take a spoon and scoop it out. into the salad. And avocado, if you do it in any time in advance, you do need to add lemon juice to keep it from, or lime juice, to keep it nice and green. And then I'm just going to mix this all around with the dressing that's in the bottom. And this is a whole meal type salad. And then the last thing I'm going to add would be a cup of crushed tortilla chips. And I'm going to leave these on top for now because I'm not going to eat the salad right away, and they will get kind of soggy if you don't mix those in last. So we'll want to mix those in right before we consume the salad. So this is a chopped salad, something you can get mostly prepared early in the day if it's a hot day. Don't have to turn on the stove. You have a whole meal right here in a bowl. Now, what I'd like to serve with this, I thought, what do I need with it that has kind of a Southwest flavor to have a nice dessert? Salad and dessert make a really good summer meal, especially if you have some protein with the beans and the chicken. It makes a hearty meal. So I made in advance a margarita tart. And this I used vanilla wafers instead of graham crackers to make the crust. And it was 10 ounces of vanilla wafers. I'm going to refer to my recipe, which was an old magazine recipe. And I used not quite all of the box of vanilla wafers. There's enough left for a little snack. And I used 1/3 cup of almond flour mixed with those vanilla wafers, and then 1/2 cup of melted butter, and pressed that into my tart pan. Now I made a rectangular tart. It calls for a 9-inch circular tart. I did a little math, and I don't have, or a 10-inch circular one. I don't have a 10-inch tart pan. I have a 9-inch and I have a 12-inch, but not a 10. So I decided to use the square one, which is about the same area. Math does come in handy sometimes. I computed the area of my circle and of this one, and it was pretty close, so I decided to use that one. Then for the filling, you mix 4 egg yolks, and then you save the whites and beat them up, the 4 egg whites. And you put 4 egg yolks with a can of condensed milk, 1/2 cup of freshly squeezed lime juice, 1/4 cup of tequila, and then you mix that well and fold in the egg whites and bake it at 350 for about 25 minutes. And I think we're going to have a layered effect when we cut into it. And I'm going to do that now, and we'll plate up one of the pieces. But that's why I call it a margarita tart. It has the lime juice and the tequila. And then we want to dress it up a little bit. So I'm going to add a little dollop of whipped cream. And I used some lime zest I saved. When you're squeezing all that lime juice, it took about 3 limes for a 1/2 cup. And I'm going to use a little of this lime zest on top, and then add a fresh strawberry. All we need is plates and a nice glass of iced tea, and we have a nice summer dinner all ready, and using the cilantro and the lettuce from the garden and some of the other greens as well. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Liz Davey, and you've been watching A Walk in the Garden on NCTV, Norfolk Community Cable Television.